Hello everyone, welcome once again to week 5 lecture videos. In this video we will be talking about measuring risk and rates of return. So with regard to calculating return of individual stock, we already have seen in week 3 that how to calculate the rate of return from a stock. So in this video we will see how we calculate risk of an individual stock as well as a portfolio, and also how to calculate return on a portfolio once we have the rate of return of individual stocks. So first of all is risk. So far we talked a lot about risk. Now how do we actually calculate risk associated with an investment in a stock? Well, typically we calculate it using variance. So variance is the deviation of individual stock returns from a mean value. For example, if you have a series of returns, then to calculate variance, we need to calculate the mean value first of all. Then we will see how individual returns are deviated from the mean value. The way it shows the riskiness is if the variance is higher, it indicates more risk because a higher variance means the individual observations are much deviated from the mean value. So it implies that the stock returns varies within a large range, which is an indication of risk. Standard deviation is conceptually the same, the deviations of individual observations from the mean value, but the difference between variance and standard deviation is if we take a square root of variance, we get standard deviation, which is a more direct measure of the risk of individual stock. Now let's see an example. We have the rate of return of an individual stocks in different states. Okay, for example, plus 40%, plus 10% and minus 20% in different states of economy. Okay, and the average of this return is 10%. So plus 40%, plus 10%, minus 20%. If we calculate average, that is 10. Now deviation from expected return and the actual return. So 10% is our expected return and R is our actual return. So in each case, we deduct these individual return from our expected return. So expected return once again is 10%, right? So 40% minus 10% is 30%. So 10% minus 10% is 0, and minus 20% minus 10% is 30%. So this is a deviation, and we square them. As we square them, we get squared deviations. Now, this is the probability that each returns occurs. So there is a 25% possibility that return will be 40%, there is a 50% possibility that return will be 10%, and there is 20% possibility that return will be negative 20%. Now what we do is we multiply this probability with this square deviation. So 25% into 90, we multiply these two and we multiply these two, and we get the probability and the square deviations multiplication result, which is 225, 0 and 225. If we sum them up, we get 450. So that's basically the variance. Now, as we square root it, we get standard deviation, which is 21. As I told you previously that this standard deviation shows how your individual observations varies from the mean value. Now, individually, this number may not be very meaningful. For example, if we say standard deviation of a stock is 21, that may not be very meaningful. However, as we compare this standard deviation of one stock or one investment opportunity with the other, we can get the idea about the difference in terms of riskiness. For example, if a standard deviation of a stock is 21, whereas standard deviation of a stock is 10, that definitely indicates that standard deviation of 10 is less riskier than standard deviation of 21. Now, how do we get portfolio return? Okay, so what's the meaning of portfolio? Portfolio means the combination of different securities. Okay, so you may decide to invest in only one security. In that case, how do we calculate return we previously learned, and how do we calculate risk that we have learned here. Now, it's not necessary that you invest only in an individual stock. You may decide to invest in a portfolio of stocks. That means a combination of different stocks. In that case, you become concerned about how to calculate portfolio return and portfolio risk. Okay. Now, with regard to portfolio return is basically the weighted average of individual returns. Okay. Let's say you have two assets, asset 1 and asset 2. Now, how do we calculate portfolio return comprising these two assets? Now, what do we do is a very simple thing. This is rate of return of asset 1. This is the proportion of investment in asset 1. So we multiply these two. Okay. And this is the rate of return of asset 2, and this is the proportion of investment in asset 2. We multiply these two and we sum them up and we get portfolio return. Now, whatever the number of securities you have in your portfolio, to calculate portfolio return, you multiply individual stock return with its corresponding weight and you sum them up to get the portfolio rate of return. Now we understand these three concepts. First of all is diversification. Now you may obviously have a question in your mind, what's the difference between investing in an individual stock and investing in a composition of stocks in a portfolio? Now definitely you would agree with me that investing in a portfolio is less risky compared to investment in an individual stock. Why? Because if you invest in an individual stock and if that stock price declines, your entire investment is at risk. However, if you invest in a portfolio of securities that comprises of different stocks, now it's likely that some stock price will go up and some stock price will go down, and as some stock price goes down, these losses will be offset by the proportion of the investment you make in the stocks that goes up. So it means that as you invest in a portfolio of a stock, you reduce some risk. So you get some benefit in investing in a portfolio of securities compared to investing in an individual stock. This is called diversification. That means investing in a combination of securities in a portfolio, you diversify some risk. Now, which risk? Risks are basically two types, unique risk and market risk. Unique risk is the risk that is specific to a particular company. Unique risk is a risk that is specific to a particular stock, and you can diversify this portion of risk. However, there are some risks. Those are actually your portfolio's exposure to market-wide factor. That means these are the type of risk that affects all the stocks. And this type of risk is called market risk, which you cannot diversify away. This risk is also known as systematic risk. Now let me give you some examples. Let's say that a very successful CEO of a company resigns, and as a result, its stock price declines. So what type of risk is this? This is definitely a unique risk. Why unique risk? Because the CEO resignation and its stock price decline, it's completely a case of one individual company. So this is called unique risk or unsystematic risk or diversifiable risk. The reason you can diversify this portion of risk is as you have different stocks in your portfolio, even if one CEO resigns and its stock price declines, you can cover these losses by your investment in other stocks, because it's not that all the CEOs have resigned at the same time. On the other hand, market risk, let's say that a natural disaster comes. As a result, your entire country and entire economy was affected, so all the stock price suffered to some extent. So this type of risk is called market risk, which is actually a market-wide exposure. Okay, and this is called systematic risk and also non-diversifiable risk, because this portion of risk cannot be diversified away. Now look at this example. This diagram basically shows the value of a portfolio in terms of dollars, where your portfolio is equally divided between Newmont and Ford. Okay, so you can see this blue line is your portfolio where you have 50% invested in Newmont and 50% invested in Ford. Okay, now look, if you have invested $100 in Ford, for example, the green line, $100 in Ford, you will, in 2009, you would ended up about, you can see, about 180 at the end of 2014. If you would have invested same $100 in Newmont in 29, you would ended up about less than 50 in 2014. Okay, so you understand that your $100 would grow up to more than 150 for your investment in Ford, and that your investment would decline if you would have invested in Newmont. However, instead of only investing in Newmont or Ford individually, if you make a portfolio, you can see that your $100 reaches to slightly less than 100. So although you still incur losses, you can see that the huge loss you could incur from investing in Newmont would be offset by the positive return you generate from Ford. So that's the benefit of investing in a portfolio, and that benefit is called diversification, because you diversify away some of your risk. Now look at this diagram carefully. So here you see average risk. Okay, average risk of investing in a portfolio comprises different number of stocks. You can see that when you invested in 2 stocks, your risk was here. Okay, and as you are increasing the number of stocks in your portfolio, the average risk is declining. Okay, average risk is declining. So as you come somewhere here, 25, you see that the line becomes almost parallel to the horizontal line. This is called asymptotic. So you see that as you invest in more and more stocks, although your risk declines, but the most important factor you need to understand that this decline in risk is not linear. What does it mean? It means that as you invest in 3 stocks, your risk is here. As you invest in 5 stocks, your risk is here. So you have reduced this amount of risk, right? By increasing 2 stocks in your portfolio. However, when you invest in 17 stock and you invest in 19 stock, you can see there may be some benefit of diversification, but that is much lower compared to what you had here. Okay, so as you have a reasonable number of stocks in your portfolio, you can see that you almost able to eliminate your diversifiable risk. So that's the end of our discussion about measuring risk and rates of return of individual stock. In the next video, we will be talking about how do we calculate return and risk of a portfolio. Thank you very much.